First off, I'm going to take burnt umber and thin it down till it's almost like water. I don't want it to cover the whole piece in solid burnt umber. I just want to kind of get a stain on it. So I'll put probably a couple of ounces in this container and then really thin it down with a lot of water. I've got it now where it's almost just like water. It's about as thick as you want it. This is a low fire clay and it's real absorbent, so I'm going to have to spray it down first with water because I don't want to put the paint on there and it soak it up, or put the paint on there and it runs real fast. So I'll just lightly kind of spray the whole piece down with water. And I'm coming back with my paint, and what I'll do is I'll really get as much off the brush as I can. I'll even kind of dampen it on the paper. Then I come back and I'll have a towel here in case it does run, and my water spray to keep it nice and moist. Because you don't want it to run. If it starts running and runs down the piece, there's nothing you can do to overcome that run mark. So you just dab it on, you do it very unevenly all over, you know, up in the crevices of the ear, behind the ear, all over the piece. I don't want to go all the way up because his cover is going to be on top of that. And it'll cover up these marks on his head. So I'm just kind of lightly getting it all the way around. And as you can see, it's going to be different shades of brown all over the piece. And that's what's going to kind of give it that metallic look and also reflect light differently. And that's what you're shooting for. You don't want just a solid brown surface all over. You want it to be mottled look and different colors all over it. You try to keep away from doing these little splotches I've made here, but those are not too bad. They'll overcome. Be real careful and get up in all the little hidden spots, because if you don't, there'll be a big white mark there. I like using white clay once it's fired because it covers better. Plus you know what it's going to look like once you've started with it. The clay that kind of has a pink tint to it, it just never looks right, and it holds the paint differently, and it just, I don't know, I just prefer the white. The hardest part on these Marines where they're uniform is where I've made the little stitching. It's very hard to get those places tinted. For some reason the acrylic just doesn't want to go down in those little spots. It looks like it's covered, and then by the time I get through and it dries, all I see is these little white lines running up and down it. So you have to pay attention to those kind of little spots that might not want to cover. You might have to come back, like there on his eyebrows. So again, it's a stippling process. You're not painting it on like you would when you paint a room or paint a wall or something. Nothing ever looks the same from one place to the next. just got to constantly be checking for places that are still not covered. They just kind of sneak up on you. I'm using just a fairly inexpensive bristle brush, round 1-inch bristle brush, and again it just lets you do that little stippling effect without leaving as much design as if you were using a square one or a rectangular one. So it just allows things to be a little more less patterned looking. Now that some of it's starting to dry, again, as I mentioned a while ago, the little small spots are really hard to get, especially with a bigger brush. So I just dropped down to a little brush with just several little bristles on it, and unfortunately I have to kind of go in and individually fill those holes. Here I am finishing, put the finishing touches here on the first coat. Continue to dab, check for places that I might have missed. This never fails. It always seems like there's a spot somewhere. Now I'm just going to spin it around, take a look, see if there's any places the paint didn't cover. Look for any places that might be on the thin side. Put a little dab there. I'll let this dry for 24 hours, and I'll come back and put my second coat of antique bronze. Today I'm going to be taking some acrylic paint that is antique bronze iridescent, which means it has small particles of bronze mixed into the acrylic paint. I'll be mixing that with water, thinning it down. It's not going to be as thin as the base coat I used the other day, but it'll still be thinner than the paint. And the other thing I do is I have some pigment that I get from the local paint store, art store, of antique copper and antique bronze. Just use a little of that, just so I can get plenty of iridescence in it. I just put in a little antique copper, and I'm going to throw in just a little bit of antique bronze. Again, that's just to make sure that it'll sparkle and shine a little more like bronze does. And I'll come back over and do the same process I did yesterday. Just dabbing it on, not painting it on. I don't want it to cover like you would cover with paint. You want it to be uneven. I'm just putting on the last few little touch-ups here, making sure everything's covered. I don't worry about covering every bit of it, because there again it kind of gives it that natural look of not being perfectly even, like somebody took it and painted it on there. Here we go, putting the finishing bronzing touches to the cover. Again, I'm going for that uneven look. This morning we're going to be doing the final step of putting on the shoe polish. You start with the darkest color first. It has a little bit of pigment in it so that you'll actually see some of the black. And you just sparingly put this on because you don't want it to be too dark. This is actually what's going to bring out and make the piece shine and make it look like metal once it's buffed. I use two brushes, one just to kind of put the first coat on. The second time is just to kind of rub it in. Now I've taken the second brush and I'm just brushing in that first coat. Just to try to fill in a few more places and rub the polish into the clay. Here on the uniform, I take and just use a little bit extra black shoe polish, get a little bit more pigment in here, because this is the only part of the uniform that's covered here that's solid black. This piece and this piece. I'm just using a little bit extra black so it'll kind of do a little bit of breaking up of colors. Again, I come back with a brush number 2 and just kind of rub that in. The next step is just use a regular old shoe brush to polish up the black shoe polish. This is when the transformation really takes place. This is when you start polishing that wax you put on with the shoe polish. The next step is just take a rag and wipe off any excess black polish. Come back with a final step, which is putting on the brown shoe polish. Since it doesn't have quite as much pigment in it, I'll put on a little bit more. Plus the black shoe polish will prevent me from putting on, or prevent some of the brown pigment from actually going into the paint. But it's already put on a kind of a layer of wax, so you really can't go through that.